All right, so we'll kick off our meeting today. We'll start with our roll call. So Kari Kloss,
Present.
Mary Fosse,
Present.
Julius Wilson,
Present.
Ben Young's not here yet, Chris Gray,
Present.
Ethel McNeil,
Present.
Jim Langus, and John Monroe's not here. We'll move on to
Carver.
here. We'll approve our minutes. So we're gonna do that next time once we get those updated. For staff comments, we'll go to Nicole.
I just wanted to let you guys know just to watch your email if the health department or someone comes out with recommendation not to congregate in small groups, then we won't, but we're probably okay, but just putting it out there for you.
And follow up to what she's saying, if anyone's not feeling well, please just stay home. And if enough people aren't feeling well, we'll just reschedule. But if you're not feeling well, we'll miss you, but don't come. So we'll move on to item number 1, review of updated material in 9 core areas.
So the first map that we have is the 9 suggested initial district cores, and it's 1 through 9. There's 9 of them, as you know, that were put together, and that's actually duplicated, so you get 2. So you can draw all over and take notes on one and have a nice clean one to take home. Through the packet are updated maps that Tony reviewed and updated, particularly around the Silver Lake area, so that that information is correct as per our last meeting. And then on the back is the spreadsheet that is the notes that we had that focus around our 9 core areas. And then there's the original number is the second box over, just so if you want to reference back to the previous spreadsheet, you can. And this provides that information so that we can kind of keep track of the conversations we're having and recommendations that we are making. So I think with that, Tony, are you ready to take over? Oh, it doesn't seem like we have audio. Just a second. We can't hear you, but can you hear us? Thumbs up if you can hear me just fine. Okay, so we can't hear you, so just a second.
Can you say something? Nope, we can't hear you still.
Let me. Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez. Okay.
We're trying one more thing to get the audio on Tony's end.
Okay, we're working on audio, so I guess I would be curious if anybody had any questions for our legal department or any questions for staff before we move forward, as we're waiting for Tony.
Council of Neighborhoods question on, there's going to be a lot of us there. Mm-hmm. Is that a concern, since we'll be talking districting? You guys will be giving a
You'll
presentation?
have to recuse yourselves from the...
From the conversation or from like the room?
Just the conversation, I would say. You won't be able to provide the feedback because you do it at this table, nor can you influence or try to encourage people to give certain types of feedback. But I actually think having you there will be helpful if there are questions or concerns. But we'll just have to be very clear and very careful, because we also don't want it to be a meeting. So you can answer questions based on previous conversations, but you won't be able to like imply or suggest things moving forward unless they're on our like documented timeline, right? So I'll provide that for you guys so that we don't get off track.
And then if you're not sure if you can answer a question based on discussions you've always had, you can always just write it down and bring it back to the next full districting commission meeting and talk about it then.
Yeah. So I think that we can totally operate in a a very good space and do it together. And I think that that will also help the neighborhoods and all of us get the right information. And then you guys can come back to the group and let the group know what worked and what didn't and what we need to improve on. So I think that would be helpful rather than just me doing that.
Was that set for March 30th? Is that when you're speaking, Smell?
Yeah, I believe so. That's the last one, or the last Monday in March, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Tony, you're gonna have to write it on paper and hold it up to the screen here if we don't get it working. That is a good idea.
I don't know. I dressed in San Diego this morning, so.
Check you out. Rocking the frequent fire mask.
I was.
That's good. Really good.
I wonder.
Chance to see how it all.
It's pretty nice. I like
Tony, can you do a sound check for us? Tony, can you do a sound check for us? Nothing. Are you on mute possibly? Do you have us muted on that side?
maybe.
I'm gonna let the expert. Can you hear us now?
He can't hear us.
This is not. We can hear you. Can you hear us? Doesn't seem like it, does it?
We can hear you.
Hmm.
Yeah, Verizon.
Can you hear if we speak into the microphone? Nope.
Can you hear us now?
I have my laptop. I could type out and email him questions if we wanted him to talk, and then
I-
for me to email him questions.
Do you have his? We'll just take a quick break, you guys. So just give us 5 minutes, okay? Thank you.
Can we do another test?
I can't hear you.
You still can't hear. You can't hear us.
At one time I could hear fine.
Yes. We can hear him, but you can't hear us. Yeah. And when I put in a little box, a little box, it's a mic in.
Don't worry about that.
There was a couple other things on there. Select the mic in. Was that the wrong one? When I plugged in. Right. Just let me have it.
I can hear you. I can hear.
So,
I can hear now. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
so now it says mic in, line in, headphones, headset.
This sounds good on my
Pull
end.
it back out and put it back in. Pull it out. Can you hear us now? Can
Yes, yes,
you can hear us now.
yes.
So, okay, I think we are ready to get started again. Thank you everyone for your patience. Appreciate it. So we will move on to jump right into item 2 after some comments from Tony.
Yes. First, let me say that I hope everyone is healthy and safe. We have the news out here. We've heard about the virus and so on. Our prayers are with you all.
Yeah.
Second, I wanted to just somewhat reiterate why we are selecting district cores. And
Right.
the courts haven't ruled a specific method of starting a plan or developing a plan. They've left that up to the jurisdiction. But what they have ruled on are something called traditional redistricting criteria. And one of them is the district core. All right. And so the courts found that it's within sort of the benefit of the voters to have and preserve and maintain district cores. By default, by creating the first redistricting plan, or as Mrs. Weber says, districting plan, which she is exactly right, you all are creating the first district cores. And so by virtue of not having any districts before, you're creating the district cores that will remain somewhat intact until usually demographic changes or some other compelling reason that your jurisdiction decides to actually alter them. So that's one of the reasons why we're focusing on district cores. They're important to courts. The second, I thought I'd just go over the 2010 data, just so people understand, why we need to use the 2010 data. And the reason for it is, once again, the courts have decided that you cannot use estimated data for equally populating the districts. So you have to use what they call 100% count data. And so they've ruled on several different types, like voter registration has actually been used to equally populate the districts. Voting age population, of course, total population. Of course, I'm not recommending any of the other two, but they ruled against using estimated data. So that's the reason why we have to go back to the 2010 data, unless you all have taken some local census and you feel very confident and have counted everybody, which I assume that's probably not the case. But what they have done is they've also said that you can use these additional sources, for example, the American Community Survey, to get an idea of the composition of the city in a more current light. And so when we put the plan together, most likely we'll look at the American Community Survey, the latest version, to get an idea of the racial and ethnic makeup of the city to be more current than what the 2010 is, just to give you an idea. But we'll also probably look at the 2019 data estimates just to get an idea of population shifts back and forth, although we're not going to use it to equally populate the data, but that will give us an idea. One of the concepts, and I don't want to talk too long, is if you all are going to draw your lines in 2 years, well, maybe where there's been populated shifts, you take allowances for that. And it may end up that maybe in 2 years you don't even have to redraw your lines because you put them within the boundaries of that plus or minus 5%, but you don't have to redraw the lines. And that's just something to consider. I'm going to throw that out at you once we get into actually, redefining the districts. That's sort of a minor thing. The second to last thing I wanted to talk to you all. There was a question last week about any other entities, besides the planning department and the neighborhood commissions. And at the time, I didn't think of it, but later on I thought of it. And by no means you have to do this, but sometimes the local historian, if you will, or someone who knows the history and the background of the city, sometimes it's somebody that you want to actually expose the plan to because they may know, well, the city originated in this neighborhood. And that may be a district core for some particular reason. So I throw that out just as an option. If you have a local historian that people trust, it may be a good idea to run that by a particular person. And also, if that person is not a city person, I think it'll help out. And the reason why, you don't want to get too top heavy on city entities actually looking at this. Having an outside historian would be better than an inside person who works for the city, just for appearance sake. And then finally, I wanted to talk, last week we mentioned the Delta neighborhood. And I added a map, and we can talk briefly about that. I don't think we need to go into detail about the maps per se. But remember, I gave a theory on why that the age of those houses were a little newer or recently built. And it comes out that there are a high percentage of renters in that particular area. You see that second to the last map. You'll see a high percentage in that particular area for renting percentage. That said, the theory somewhat goes away because if you look at what's the neighborhood to the right, is it Bayside? Let me see.
He's pulling up a map on his screen.
Yeah, trying to pull up that particular map. Right. Yeah, Bayside. That also has a high percentage of renters, and yet it still has an older construction of homes. And so the theory half works, but the theory can work if you feel that those renters are renting maybe homes in that particular area. And so those are the past things that I wanted to talk to you about. And I guess the future things were essentially I created a new set of maps, as you see. And the data for the maps didn't really change, although I clipped it to the city boundaries. I think the one that changed a little was Silver Lake, you see at the bottom. I think that was the main one. The other ones really had pretty much zero population or very low population in the areas that were clipped off by the city boundaries to the neighborhoods. So it didn't really change dramatically, but it changed slightly. Are there any questions on the updated maps? I do have, by the way, a couple of typos I need to correct in the source. The sources, just to give you an explanation, the sources, I try to reflect now the sources of where the original data. What I had was the fact that I used the ESRI system, the demographic enrichment system, 2019, and a subset really is pulling from the 2010. And so it doesn't really give you the specific idea of where it originates. So I've got a new updated version of maps that shows you, for example, the 2010 comes from the 2010 data source, not the enrichment data source. That's just the system that it's pulled from, if you can see what I'm saying. So the new maps that I have now I can send you actually has the original. There was only one or two that actually changed, really. And so where you see 2019 enrichment data, it was from the 2019 enrichment data source, except for two, I believe. And that was the language other than English and the 2010 population data.
And those two, the source would just be updated to the 2010 census.
One would be the 2010 for the 2010. The other one was the American Community Survey,
Okay.
2013 to 2017. Once again, it's pulled from that ESRI 2019 data set, but it uses the American Community Survey. It's a question.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Wow, that's loud.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for updating some of those areas we talked about in terms of the population. There's still a few small areas that are not included. Were the populations included in the neighborhood that's sort of adjacent to them, or are we still missing probably some small numbers, but are those areas to still be added in?
Which specific areas are you referring to?
So for example, there's one just north of the Silver Lake shaded area that's within city lines, and there's, again, probably not a ton of people, but eventually when we get to that point, I assume you'll be adding those in if they're not already?
Oh, you're talking about the empty area. It looks empty. It looks, it's in white. That's right above Silver Lake?
Yeah, as one example.
Right, right. But what I did was I used only the neighborhoods. That's not considered, apparently, a neighborhood. I pulled down the neighborhood boundaries from the Washington portal, and this is what they have of the boundaries. So, for example, the same thing would be on the industrial area over to underneath Boulevard Bluff. That's not considered a neighborhood, yet there's a small population that exists there. So there are some areas that are considered neighborhoods, apparently, or the planning department who created, I assume, the boundaries for the neighborhoods don't consider them neighborhoods. If you can...
Would it be helpful to update another map then that had the population within those missing areas for our next meeting? Or do you guys see a... Yeah, is that possible, Tony?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Well, they just won't have a designated or particular neighborhood. They'll just
Yeah.
have a population.
And I think we could just do one, to save on printing, I think we could just do one map with the population that covers all of that, and then we can use the maps we already have for further conversation, but just so everyone can see those numbers.
Absolutely. Yes, I can do that.
Thank you.
Let me also say that, you know, I struggled with actually giving you all the maps with the population, because I thought you all would begin drawing maps right away because you now have population, and you would get a little ahead of yourself with drawing the plans now. And that's not the purpose of what we're at right now. We're not in the plan development. We're just sort of looking at the overview of the city and understand different sections of the city. But I know I would be doing that if I were your situation. I would be drawing a plan using the neighborhood population. The second thing is that some of the neighborhoods cut and split census blocks. So the populations aren't necessarily exact of what we're going to end up with, because we're going to have to grab the entire census block. We're not going to split it. But because of the fact that the city draws neighborhoods probably because of housing, not because of census blocks, they're going to split occasionally unless they draw them using census blocks. And many times the city won't do that. They'll just draw because there's a neighborhood there. There's houses here. Whereas the census draws census blocks because of statistical enumeration purposes. Two different sort of objectives. And so some of the numbers that you'll see will change because we'll have to actually grab the entire census block, or we'll have to eliminate that census block from the neighborhood. Let me see. So finally, I think the next is to begin to whittle down, unless are there any questions? Let me say that first. On the maps or anything thus far? Okay. So we need to begin to whittle down from our 9 core areas, and you see the map that I created there that shows you the 9 that we came up with last week. And so we have the Northwest neighborhood, Delta neighborhood, downtown, and I use the precincts because we're not going to split precincts. I use Rucker Hill subdivision. We have the Boulevard Bluff, Harbor, Seacrest, Glen Haven, View Ridge, Madison, Pinehurst, Beverly Park, Lowell, Casino Road, and then Silver Lake. And so those were our 9 core areas. And our objective really, I hope today potentially, is to whittle those down to 5 if we can. And here's one of the things that I think you ought to consider. If you're in front of the citizens at a forum and someone asks a question, why did you pick this as a core area? We need to have, or you need to have an answer. So if there isn't a good answer, then that's most likely a reason that shouldn't be a core. So what we should do is just go down, and I don't necessarily have any particular strategy other than maybe top to bottom, and decide why that particular core is relevant for the city and why it should be maintained. So if we want to begin, we can begin up north, where we have the Northwest neighborhood. So does anybody have any compelling reason why there should be a core? And we mentioned some last time. And so
If we need starting points, this Excel sheet is included in your packet, so you can refer back to that.
yes. So I guess we should, quickly talk about each one. If there's any reason not to actually include that in as a core, maybe that's the reason why we should bring it up. We could use that process of elimination. So does anybody have any heartburn, let me say, of selecting the Northwest as a particular core? I think that's...
I don't know that I have any heartburn, but I will be bringing up later that when I see what decisions we make on core areas, that I believe this part of of Everett could just be called North Everett, and that just be one core, not Northwest and not Delta, but just North Everett.
So what we have is a proposal to combine the two. Is that the combined Northwest and Delta?
I'm saying North Everett. I don't know whether you combine them or what essentially I'm saying that should be one core area is North Everett.
Ultimately, I would be worried about stacking against Delta, because Delta is its own little pocket of, there's a lot of economic difference as well as minorities in that area, and the voting power of Northwest would just completely overshadow Delta. So that would be my concern about blocking them together as just the North. They're very, very different areas on the East and West.
By the time we're done trying to meet the plus or minus 20,604, we're going to find some of those, may find some of those same type of comparisons in a number of, in other districts as well.
That's true.
And if we're going to keep, if we are going to bifurcate them and have two separate areas in North Everett, that means that they're going to be elongated at some point if they ever become districts. And the Supreme Court made a decision and, at some point back that we needed to be careful about, I have the language here, shapes can't be extremely elongated. Now, I don't know by the time we're done how elongated they will be, but to get the 20,000 population coming from two different areas in North Everett, you're going to end up going quite a ways south to be able to gather that population that you need. So I believe we should strive tonight to find 5 core areas of the city, core areas like West Everett, which is like Forest Park out, and I think Westmont, Holly should have their own designation just as much as others, and we've got Silver Lake, and then we've got Central Everett. We've got about 5 areas, not specific neighborhoods perhaps. But I do think I've taken more time than I needed. My point was I believe North Everett should be one area, one core.
I think that you have thought it through nicely. And I tend to agree with you because if you look at the map, the neighborhood map, what you will find is that if you did split Northwest and Delta up, then you would have to come on the west side for Northwest through the downtown Everett precincts, even Rucker Hill, those neighborhoods all the way down. And on the Delta neighborhood, you have to come down south the same way and come down quite a bit. And so from a compactness, and this is what you're referring to, from a compactness point of view, it does make sense to keep them together. The Delta neighborhoods, or Delta neighborhood, most likely will have to be connected with the lower of those neighborhoods that are south below the Delta neighborhood. And I'm not sure if they are any different than the Northwest neighborhood, because they'll have to be connected with those to the south of that. So I tend to think that you're on track, but you all should make the decision.
I think if you visited the Delta neighborhood and you walked around and then you walked around Northwest, you would see why the statistics are slightly off and different. There is a large diversity in Delta compared to Northwest. And that's not discounting, the beauty of Northwest. It's a beautiful neighborhood. But to create it as a core not to be divided up and pairing it with Delta just doesn't make any sense. I understand if you just want to leave Northwest as a core not to be divided up, but there's no reason to combine it with Delta so that we can't make that decision later if we wanted to make that dividing line actually be Broadway. And I understand compactness, but you had said originally sometimes some of those things end up being a little bit less compact or a little bit less congruent than other things when you're trying to allow for those other things like diversity or economic difference.
And I think that if there isn't a decision point, then I think we let it stay pat and we move on. However, what I'm looking ahead, and by no means should we necessarily do this at this particular moment. If you draw the plan in your mind and you look that Delta has to be connected to somebody, the question is does Delta fit anyone up in that area? And I think from what I see, it doesn't necessarily fit any of the neighborhoods in that particular area. It's almost an island on itself somehow for some particular reason. But nonetheless, if you all cannot make a determination, let's leave it pat, and then let's move on.
Yeah, it sounds like we have Broadway, and then we have as a potential divide, which could cause a conflict because it's a natural boundary, and then we have Delta, which is different than Northwest, and then you have the elongated option as well. So no matter how you split up these neighborhoods in this north area, there's going to be something we're going to have to justify, and whether that's crossing Delta or what you felt was stacking or what Jim felt was elongating the district, one of those things is going to have to happen at some point during the plan. And so it's figuring out which one of those things makes the most sense for the neighborhood and for the district surrounding it. So I think leaving it for now as is sounds good, because there's so many different reasons why we should put it together, and there's so many different why we should not put it together. So if we're comfortable moving on to the next one, then let's do that. And if you want to continue conversation, then we can do that too.
Well, are you're suggesting we delay this until later in the meeting?
Yeah, maybe we see something else that'll happen in
See
another
what the
conversation that could help
Let's
us
see
make
what the
this
other areas
decision.
are. Okay.
And let me also say this, that what we should do is we should have cores that are, if you will, scattered through the city. And right away, you notice that there are 4 core areas up in the northern end. You've got Northwest Delta, and then the downtown, and then Rucker Hill subdivision. And so from a purely logistical plan development point of view, it could be very difficult to draw 5 districts with 4 core areas in the same location. So clearly something's going to have to give as we begin to move down south. Something's going to have to break. And I think that it's likely it's going to be maybe the next 2 core areas, potentially, may have to actually be eliminated, because we just can't have 4 core areas in the same location. So if we move down a little further, we end up with the downtown area, downtown Everett. And once again, anything compelling and any problems or issues.
I think that downtown Everett precincts and Rucker Hill should be one. And going back, I don't want to dwell on this a lot, but Northwest and Delta, if we don't make some decisions here, all we're doing is playing games, and we're gerrymandering under the cover, and we need to clean it up. And so somewhere down the line, we're going to have to deal with these issues. And I think downtown Everett and Rucker Hill should be one, and I still agree that Northwest and Delta should be one.
And so,
Tony, if I could, I think that could we go into reverse order so that if we started down south and went north, that by the time that we have 1 or 2 districts somewhat outlined, then it may be easier for us to arrive at a decision as to what to do in North Everett. I personally know exactly what both people are saying, and until 3 weeks ago, I didn't realize that actually the Delta neighborhood is more populated, higher populated than the what do they call it? The Northwest Everett neighborhood. The challenge there being is the number of folks that actually cast a ballot. So my suggestion here, to get back to the original point, is let's start south and try and move up the map rather than starting north and moving down the map.
I agree, because originally when I was looking at this, I was hoping we were going to start down with Silver Lake, because while Silver Lake has its own, set of characteristics, I don't see any way that it would end up being divided, like logically speaking. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a core in itself, correct? And we could move that one out of the way.
I think Silver Lake is southeast Everett, and that's going to take into account probably some of Twin Creeks and maybe part of Cascade View to come up with a population of 20,000. And Silver Lake.
We're getting ahead with the population conversation, though. So this is about people. This is about areas that have interests that are similar. And when we're Tony earlier explained that this is a process that he's created that will hold up in court. So we have to have the conversation about the people and what's in these neighborhoods and how they work before we can have the conversation of the population numbers. So I think we're just a little ahead.
Yes, and a little no, because I think we have to use or interject a little logic in this to make some determination. So if we start down south and we look at Silver Lake, I immediately see exactly what the commissioner said. We're going to have to create a district around here. Oh, you all can't see it around. Let me move to a particular around Silver Lake, Twin Creeks, and Cascade View. And so Silver Lake, if you do not have any heartache about that becoming a core, makes sense. There's nothing else around there. It could be debatable whether people have changed your mind of selecting it as a core, but it makes sense to have that southern east end somewhat as a core. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So then we can say we've selected our first one. Definitely will be the Silver Lake area. Now, if we move to the west, what we don't necessarily have a neighborhood. We have Casino Road, and my thoughts on Casino Road is that automatically that should be a particular area and not a road. And so what I'm thinking is that actually should be Westmont and not Silver Lake. So Westmont really should be the core area and not Silver Lake, just a road.
Westmont or Casino Road?
Casino Road, you just got to confuse.
You're saying Silver Lake. Are we talking about the difference between Westmont and Silver Lake, or Westmont and Casino Road?
Right. What I'm referring to is that right now we have Casino Road as a core area. What I'm saying is that, one, we don't want to split neighborhoods if we can't or don't have to. Two, Casino Road exists inside Westmont. So really what we are referring to is Westmont being that core area. That's really what I'm getting to. Instead of a road being the core area, what I'm saying is that core area becomes Westmont. Just like we have neighborhoods, Lowell neighborhoods, Northwest, Everett, and Delta. We have entire neighborhoods. Really what we're talking about, most likely when we say Casino Roads, the majority exist in Westmont. I believe so. It doesn't. And so if you look at the map, you see that the Casino Road goes mostly to Westmont, and then there's a small sliver, that exist in Cascade View. And so what I'm saying is that Westmont seems like it is a core area versus Casino Road, which encompasses Westmont, or Westmont encompasses Casino Road.
Tony,
Yes.
I'm just thinking, if the core areas are representative of the city, and I'm meaning that in that the people who live in Everett recognize what we're talking about, they're going to recognize Casino Road as opposed to Westmont. And no offense to Westmont at all. It's just that when I think of North Everett, I understand what I'm talking about there, about 41st North. And Silver Lake, I can think of that, and I think other people in town would too. So to me, even though it's a road that we're speaking of, we're really talking about the area. So I guess my question is, Westmont being the name of that core area is probably not as recognizable as Casino would be to people who live in town.
Okay,
And-
I got exactly
and-
what you're saying.
and following
So in
up on-
essence, Casino Road would be the core area, but it encompasses the area.
Just a
around
second,
the-
Tony. We have commissioners that just wanted to follow up. Just 1 second,
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry. There was
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. So Casino Road would be the core area, but it encompasses the area of Westmont. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Because you really don't draw a plan using a road is the point I'm trying to get to. We're going to draw plans with really precincts connected together and neighborhoods trying to attempt to stay as whole as possible. So we're not going to draw roads as being areas. And so it's somewhat of a, I understand what you're saying, but if it really helps with the citizens, it makes perfect sense to call that somewhat of a Casino Road core area. Yet really what we're talking about is the Westmont area where the majority of Casino Road exists. If that's not the case, please tell me. I see, does Casino, let me ask you a question. Does Casino Road exist in Westmont mostly?
Following up on what Kari said, if you look at the populations out in that area, Holly and Westmont have very large populations. They're a big part of the Casino Road south of 526, and it bleeds over a little bit into Cascade as well. But I concur with Kari.
Right, but you don't want to draw a district made up of roads. If you could follow what I'm saying, you don't want to create a district that is as narrow as a road or the subdivisions on either
Yeah.
side.
Why is that?
Because it doesn't look compact. It looks like it's gerrymandered.
But since we got you backing us and we're not doing that here, is it illegal? Or are you not allowed to use a road as a core? Like, is it not, like,
No.
make it make more sense to me?
Now, and let me just say this. I'm not saying we can't use it as a core, but it should encompass more than the road. Let me just give you an example of what they did in North Carolina. You know, the Congressional District of North Carolina, there was a case called Shaw v. Reno in the 1990s. And the district, the 12th Congressional District, at one point went down the Interstate 95, no population, basically. It went down 95, essentially connecting cities to cities, really. The courts really looked at that and said this was a clear racial gerrymander. And this is what started all of the court cases of racially gerrymandered cases that said that race can't predominate. That was sort of the original case that kicked off that. And so anytime a court would see something with just a road like that, that's what would come to mind, that this is a racially gerrymandered road. If we find that there is, say, predominantly minority folks in that would stick out like a sore thumb. Because the court case that started off, Shaw v. Reno, that's what they did. They went down the Interstate 95 and went down a road, no population, but what they were trying to do was connect two black cities with each other. Yes.
So is there a way to where we can use a percentage of the road, a part of the road, you know, because that's a common name. Casino Road in the city is a common name. It's a known to everybody that lives out here.
Oh, yeah.
That street.
I'm not saying don't use the name. Oh, I'm not saying that. Oh, no. And I understand when you started into stating that people know about Casino Road. People understand what you're talking about. That resonated with me, so I completely agree. What I'm saying, when we start to develop the plan, we can't develop the plan off of a road.
So I'm going to redirect this a little bit because I think what we're saying is, so Casino Road is a road, but it's also like a whole community. And so I think what we can say is that Westmont, for the purpose of having an area, is the core, but we're going to say it's Casino Road, like parentheses Westmont. Like the area that Westmont covers is what we're talking about, but specifically Casino Road is just a unique area in the city. And it's a more easily identifiable place for people that are from around here rather than saying Westmont. So we're not saying that we should make the road its own thing.
And I
It's
think
just
the
using
community
name.
will want to know that you had the conversation and you considered it. And I think calling it that recognizes that you did have that conversation and that thought was put into it.
And there's nothing wrong with saying this is the Casino Road area or the Casino Road community or the surrounding community of Casino Road or something like that, that gets to the point and people will understand what you're talking about. But most likely, we may split Westmont, but if there's no reason to split Westmont, then the entire area of Westmont will go into the Casino Road area.
I think it seems like we're pretty much in agreement that that's what we should do. So I think we can move on to the next area.
Okay, so we've got 2 areas now. Let's go to our third one, which Pinehurst really, or do we want to go to Boulevard Bluff, Harvard, Seacrest? Well, let's go to Pinehurst, Beverly Park. That sticks out to me. What do you all think?
What sticks out about that to you?
It sticks out as though I would not have that as a core area because it's too close to Casino Road and Silver Lake, and I'm not sure if we can disperse the districts unless there's a compelling reason. Again, this is up to you all to keep it. Is there a compelling reason to make that a core area?
Throwing this out here to the group, but what about like historic Broadway, where you have, as Everett Mall Way cuts up one way, Broadway goes down, you kind of have Valley View on one side, Lowell on one side, trying to think, Cascade View on the other, Pinehurst is in that, but I mean, that is kind of the old, and you have the two that are kind of split that way, and the freeway splits it too.
You know, the downtown core is small. I know it's important, of course. This is the center of our city. But again, you have to be thinking ahead. At some point, we need to be at least thinking about a couple of different aspects, whether it's precincts or population. It's got to run in our minds. So it could be central Everett all the way south. That could be one area. Maybe out to Madison to include that as an entire area as a central Everett South core area, because it would take in Rucker Hill.
Yeah.
And I just don't know how far south you can go because, again, we get into the precincts and populations, but that's kind of the central part of Everett, downtown south to Madison to Pinehurst. So I can see where that could be a core area. Yes. Whether you all decide to make it that or not, I don't know, but I can see where that would be a core area.
My only concern, and I know we don't want to get ahead of ourselves with this, is that in looking at Casino Road and the area where Silver Lake is, we're going to have to cross over that 526, Route 526. to gain population. And so one of the places and areas we're going to have to gain will be that area right there. And so, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but most likely those districts that there do not have enough population for 2 districts, and we'll have to cross over.
Twin Creek should be there with Silver Lake. Twin Creek should be pulled over to Silver Lake.
So, and I completely understand and tend to agree of a central area. I'm not sure that Pinehurst would be it, though. It may be slightly above that to be the central area, because we may have to take population from Pinehurst.
I would maybe jump in then of the 2, Pinehurst versus Lowell, based on how far south Pinehurst is. Perhaps Lowell becomes that core area, because it is, again, historic Everett on the river, slightly different focus, and it's a very known area within the city. And maybe that spreads. I mean, again, when we start getting population, that's going to be a whole different thing. But of the 2, I would probably push for Lowell over Pinehurst as a core area. I mean, it it's so hard.
I agree. I think we could have Lowell be a core and remove Pinehurst and Beverly Park as a core, just because more than likely we are going to have to tap into that Pinehurst Beverly Park neighborhood to make anything work anywhere else. But just looking at where Lowell is, it is very unique, and it would be kind of a hard one to split up. We might end up having to, but I would agree we should make that a core and drop Pinehurst and Beverly Park for now.
It's not that whole central area part. It's just a small piece.
Right.
It doesn't take into account the downtown area, Rucker Hill, as you move south, Glacier, Glacier View, South Forest Park. That's kind of the central area that I think we need to somehow think about in Everett.
That's right.
I understand the local politics, but I just want to really be thoughtful about what we do for the right reasons.
The challenge is, without knowing whether we're going to keep Northwest and Delta together or separate, then if we're going to consider like making South Forest Park or Glacier cores.
I'm not saying both of them.
I'm saying, yeah, but they're
area.
also 2 of our smallest ones. I mean, Lowell's pretty small, but in terms of, I don't know, neither of those is really jumping out at me as a place that I would consider like a core area of our city.
I agree with you. It's an area that I'm trying to talk about. Just like next we're going to talk about we're going to talk about West Everett, everything from Forest Park south. It's a core area. It's kind of, that's easier. This is a core also. I just don't know where it is.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's Glacier, South Forest Park, Rucker Hill, but it's right there. It's that core. It's that. So
Like
whatever
a central Everett core.
I don't know what to call it.
You know, when you're looking at this, you have to understand that when you look at Lowell, and even when you look at Silver Lake, a lot of that ends up being in the county and not in the city. So that's going to make those areas a lot different.
I think he updated these. This is just the city of Everett. So everything that's shown on this map right now is the city of Everett. So nothing on our map is unincorporated right now. If I'm understanding it correctly, we updated the map, right? Yeah.
That's
So
correct.
there's no unincorporated at play right now. We're not talking about that.
I don't agree with
Right.
you that.
Now, what the commissioner may be saying is that that area may reflect, the socioeconomic and the environment of a county area potentially, and so that may be what she's talking about. And there is some logic and some sense that if there's a common area that is not an urban area, maybe similar to the county area, and grouping that together. But I hear what all of you are saying, and I think I heard that the Lowell area will be selected over the Pinehurst area, which makes more sense to me from a purely geographic and spatial point of view. You know, I'm not sure about the context of being a core, but it makes sense to me from a plan development point of view.
Jim,
I
could
don't
we, sorry,
yes.
Tony, I think that Jim made an interesting point that I'd like to hear a bit more about actually. So is your idea, Jim, that this kind of central area might not necessarily even be a neighborhood? It might be like a combination or pieces of part of those neighborhoods. I mean, I heard you kind of invisible lines here, but I'd like to kind of understand if your proposal is that maybe it's this core is not even a neighborhood, but an area such as small as like.
Well, this is really challenging. I think it's hard for everybody because we're splitting hairs when we decide some are core areas, some aren't. Again, I understand the politics of Everett. I just want to make sure when we're done that and it's going to be hard because there are different data points that Tony has provided, precincts, income, housing types, and at the end of the day, we're going to have to create 5 districts with populations fairly close to 20,600 plus or minus, and it's going to be we're going to be getting into it, the real decisions as we move further along, and Tony gives us the alternatives. Right now, in putting together core areas, I think of areas of the city. I think of North Everett, West Everett being everything from Forest Park to Mukilteo, which is View Ridge, and Harbor View, and Boundary. What's it called? Boulevard Bluffs, and I see Silver Lake. I see Casino Road, Westmont. I'm looking more at areas rather than neighborhood, and that may be the wrong approach because I know we're trying to focus on particular core neighborhoods, and that's hard to do.
But I think core areas is the conversation, not necessarily core neighborhoods. So I think that type of kind of at least having that conversation is important because there is nothing saying we absolutely have to keep neighborhoods together. Although I know people at home probably are frustrated with that, I think it's worth the conversation to say, is there an area, not necessarily a neighborhood, that this group would consider a core? I don't want to put you guys in a box this early in the conversation because this is about Everett and what we feel here, not necessarily, the lines that are already drawn. So I just like to say that, feel free to be creative because this is that opportunity to do so.
So kind of jumping off what you said, what do you think about instead of selecting South Forest Park or Glacier View specifically as a core, what about like a central Evergreen Way core? Because Evergreen Way it bisects that, and I would say it's one of the main kind of roads to go through. It turns into Rucker once you get north, and once you get further south, it turns into Highway 99. So similar to Casino, that kind of Evergreen Way area, it's a unique area of the city.
And I guess I want to say that's why I was coming up with Historic Broadway, because it's kind of these lines where the traffic sort of went through, houses are all around it, you have businesses all around it, so Evergreen Way, Broadway would be fine, somewhere in the middle, yeah.
I think the commissioner was coming up with a central district concept, and that makes sense. I think people understand that it's appealing, and as Ms. Weber said, don't feel like we have to lock ourselves in. Now is the time to actually change and adjust before we actually define these. We don't want to go back after that. But now's the time to adjust. So if we, for example, wanted to create or look at a central district area, now would be the time. Instead of looking at Lowell or looking at even part of Pinehurst, there could be somewhat of a central district core there that we actually define. So if we decide to do that, we would change up, and I would create a map for that and come back next month. We'd have that as a core area.
Well, if we can select general areas, call them core areas, and without defining, without getting too specific, that provides you an opportunity to actually take all your data points, everything that you've done, all the populations and things that you would use, benchmarks you would use, and come forward with 3 or 4 different proposals, and we can talk about those. I'm not saying that particular areas shouldn't be in a district. I'm saying let's look at areas, and then you do your work and draw them together and make sure that they fit the criteria, compactness, and they aren't haywire in terms of how they're put together. And so that's all I'm trying to get to, is certain areas.
So, was there a statement? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna, I guess, pretty much agree. I think this is a good exercise, and this concept of the cores probably works in a lot of cases. The more that I'm listening and thinking through it, it feels like that may not be the case for us. When half of the core areas we've identified are in the north half of the city, and that's kind of landlocked. We want to approach it in this process that you've laid forward, but the reality is there still are geographic and population limitations in that. And so to me, if we're fairly well set on 2 of these areas, we'll call it, we're talking about an L shape now. And in my mind, there's only a few different ways to dice up that area geographically. So I guess I'm agreeing with you. It makes more sense to me to kind of think about areas of the city almost geographically, and there's always going to be pockets that don't necessarily fit into that in all of them. So that might be the best approach in the end.
Right. We're actually saying the same thing. The areas that we pick will be the core areas, but we don't have to necessarily view them as any particular, let's say, neighborhood. The reason why we use neighborhood is because there's the concept of keeping the neighborhoods whole. That's the reason why. And so we attempt to try to keep those neighborhoods whole because of the community of interest, because them being communities of interest. Recognizing that they're not going to, all of them will not be wholly pieces of entities. But the concept of having them as whole is a good concept, and I think the citizens will appreciate that. That concept or that process of keeping them whole. But that being said, there's nothing wrong with having a collection of areas that are contained within the neighborhoods as being a core area. And so that's why I said the central district concept makes sense. If you want me to create another or additional map that says now Lowell, Pinehurst, or part of Pinehurst, Beverly, because I'm fearful that it's just too close to that southern area. I can go back and create a somewhat of a central district if you just let me know where you would want that to be, and that could become our 3rd core, and then we can move on to the next one. So does everyone tend to agree that maybe there is somewhat of a central district area, I guess?
Simone, you want to do a field vote and just kind of see how the room is feeling about a central core area or not?
Yeah. So raise your hand, we're doing a field vote. So raise your hand if you are in favor of the idea of a central core area, as we've been discussing. Raise your hand if you're opposed.
am I seeing this correctly? We have one opposed, you're not voting, and then 4. What did you do? For it? And Ben, can you talk a little bit about why you don't think that's a good idea, and then we can continue the conversation?
Because there's nothing central about Everett. That's it. That's the bottom line. There is absolutely nothing central about Everett. There is, when folks say a business district, I think in terms of something more than what exists in downtown Everett. Everett, it's not, the central area of Everett, while it may encompass a number of neighborhoods, I think that you're going to have to factor in part of, I just don't think that will work based upon what we need to do. It is, while we may not be necessarily focused on population, but I am looking at the population as well as the area itself, and it just doesn't support itself or lend itself to that.
Ben, I concur with your point on the downtown or business district, whatever you refer to it as. Do you have another name for that general area out that encompasses Glacier View and maybe Port Gardner and Lowell and is there another name for that area that is better than Central District?
I see Glacier View as the center of that district. It is just, I just see Glacier View. I look at it and that's where my eyes are automatically drawn to. It may not, that may not work out depending on what happens up north. So that's just where I land on it.
Okay, so is it agreed that we would take a look at, I guess, some type of central district area versus in lieu of the Lowell and Pinehurst?
I think, can we take a second to look at, so like Ben just presented Glacier View, and I think we have data that looks at population, numbers, graduation, diversity, and things like that. So maybe the commission takes a second to look at the data on that neighborhood and see if anyone wants to change their field vote or their mind or propose something different. So I say give everyone a minute or so, and then we'll see from there.
That sounds good.
Clarification, when we create a core area, so that area is not to be divided up, correct?
The concept is that that area will remain intact.
So
Now,
the
of
larger we
course,
make those areas, the more limited you are on creating the map, because you won't be able to divide up any of those areas based on numbers and size.
That's right. That's the concept.
Great question.
Yeah, very good.
If we choose, if they choose, or we choose Glacier View to be the core area, today, the next meeting, we could change our minds, or is that permanent? Is it core? Are we stamping it? Is it certified today?
What we're trying to do is reduce from 9 to 5. Potentially, we can change our mind anytime. We don't want to do that. We want to actually decide upon that and then move forward. But we can potentially, if there's something dramatically wrong, we don't want to move ahead with something wrong. So this is not the end all if we happen to do this. What it does mean is that the process that I laid out is a slight bump in the road. We have to go back and do something else.
Can somebody clarify what specific area and outlines that we're looking at right now? Is it just Glacier View? Are you combining that with Lowell? I'm confused about where your central.
There was
district
one
lies.
argument for Lowell, one argument for a central district that doesn't necessarily have neighborhood boundaries, and then one argument for Glacier View. So I just wanted everyone to take a minute to look and see their
I think
thoughts around
Mary
this.
asks a good question. You know, that Glacier Peak actually covers, if that's kind of the core area, it would probably take in Port Gardner, Rucker Hill, Forest Park, and Lowell. And Pinehurst becomes kind of a swing area, because you had said earlier, I believe, Tony, that Pinehurst has some population that may need to be distributed. So I think the answer to Mary's question is, even though if it is called Glacier Peak, it's really more than Glacier Peak. It's that area that extends north a ways and east and west. It's kind of that whole four, I believe that. Ben, do you, when you see Glacier Peak, do you see that can't be a standalone? It's got to include 4 or 5 of those areas.
That's correct. You could, for that matter, I'm looking at it, you could call it Lowell for that matter. It's not a difference to me. It's a name. It is just the area that it's covering. It's to me, it's just a name, not an area. But it may encompass all of those areas. It is definitely not going to be, we know that in that area, it's like the second or the third smallest area in that area. So we know that it's not going to be just Glacier View. It's going to be a number of the areas that are surrounding it. I was just saying Glacier View because it was central, but I am perfectly happy with calling that same area Lowell.
Well, Glacier View does touch all of those areas. It touches Lowell, touches South Forest, Port Gardner, Pinehurst. So when you came up with that name, I thought it was a good description.
Do you want to do another fill vote,
Lowell's the name,
Simone?
Lowell's the name.
So we'll do another field vote just to discuss about, or to,
Can I suggest an alternate approach before we do that? So we've identified this area to the west, the Boulevard Bluffs, et cetera, as a potential core. Personally, I don't see in all the conversations I've heard that could in any way fit with Casino Road and Westmont Holly. So to me, that seems like it has to be a core. And so process of elimination with just some vague population numbers. Now you've got Silver Lake, Casino Road, Westmont Holly, and Boulevard Bluffs that comes into it somehow. I mean, that kind of drives what options you could present to us in a way, right? And then, I mean, we're kind of haggling over a name of an area that we don't really, that wasn't even identified as a potential core.
So that's an excellent point. So does everyone agree on the Boulevard Bluff, Harvard, Seacrest, Glen Haven, and View Ridge, Madison being a core?
Yes.
If we establish that, then we have eliminated or reduced where we actually can go next. Okay, so we now have 3 core areas.
Just very different than a lot of other areas. I mean, the notes on the back, right?
And so
Please use your
we
mics,
have-
guys.
I wasn't here last time. Can somebody reiterate why that was considered a core area?
We thought about Boulevard Bluffs and all of that because you're dealing with the traffic coming out of Boeing and a lot of that industrial, and they all kind of have about the same sort of setup along there. They would have the same issues if it came down to it.
It's on page 1.
Is there,
It's a huge block that's isolated by Forest Park. I mean, it really has its own area.
That's exactly the point I was going to make, is that Boulevard Bluff really has to be attached to something, and it has to be attached really to Harbor View, Seacrest, Glen Haven. You're forced into that situation, so you have to connect those two, and then of course the next one, of course, would be View Ridge, Madison, to connect. And so there is a logic, and all three of them are on the water. There is a community of interest of them being connected by that water. So it tends to make sense. But now we're down to two left. And so...
Does that answer your question, Mary? Sorry, Tony, I just want to make sure that before we move on, Mary feels...
I'm sorry.
Okay, so by connecting View Ridge Madison in effect to Boulevard Bluffs, it makes it so that whole entire area would be unable to be edited or broken up if need be to create compact or otherwise filled districts, correct?
And that's the intent. I mean, we can't be rigid that if the district if the plan demands us to break up an area, we'll probably have to. I mean, but that's the intent, that we have these core areas and they will remain intact. Without developing the full plan, we don't know for sure. But the concept is that, yeah, they become a whole set and we treat it like a unit, if you will.
Would you feel more comfortable or less comfortable with cutting off View Ridge, Madison, and just making it the Harbor View and Boulevard Bluff? Sounds like you've got some area concerns.
I feel like View Ridge, Madison, we wouldn't necessarily need to include in that, just because there's a lot of differences there with comparing to Boulevard Bluffs. I wouldn't necessarily put them in the same group automatically, but they're gonna, I mean, it just constricts him from being able
I'm
to
just
draw
asking
his
the
maps.
question. I don't have...
That's the only thing. I think if we're going to do concise core areas, they should be as small and compact as possible, so we're not restricting him from doing his job.
So you have 5 areas that you can choose, and based upon the geography of Boulevard, Harbor View, View Ridge, you're going to be pretty hard pressed to separate them.
But what if we have like a chunk right there that we need to fill for another district, or because it relates, or if he's trying to do, that's the only question.
I'm just saying, you're going to be pretty hard pressed to separate them, those 3 areas, just because of geography.
I think what the commissioner is saying is that we only have so many directions to go. With Boulevard Bluff, we can, and Harbor View, Seahurst, and Glen Haven, we could go south to Westmont. And I think we've said that's not compatible, I think is what came up before. And so our only choice is to go west to obtain the population, go east to obtain the population for that particular area. So I think we're going to have to go into, now your point about not breaking up View Ridge, Madison is a good point, meaning that, well, we could go west and chop View Ridge, Madison in half or something like that. And that is a possibility. And so I understand, what you're saying, but I think certainly Boulevard Bluff and Harbor View, Seahurst, Glen Haven should be 2 that stand together. No question about
For the sake of argument, I would propose we do the first 2, and it'll probably stand to reason that View Ridge will be rolled into that, but then we're less restricted. Is that fair?
That's what I was going for.
I'm going with your, I know, Tony, that tonight's not the night, but if you add the population of those areas, they add up to a little over 19,000, and that's the goal that you've been trying to reach. If you start taking areas out, where are you going to bring other areas in to get the population you need to meet that 5%? I mean, this is one that's fairly clear. If there's another way to get there, population-wise.
Does anyone have any major opposition to just having it be Boulevard Bluffs and Harbor View, Seahurst, and Glen Haven for now?
I was just wondering if if there's any historic buildings or any landmarks or anything like that that's been here before Everett came. We would like those things. I would like those things to stay here even after us. So is there any historic landmarks? Because I think that's the main thing that this group is doing. We're making certain parts of Everett landmarks to where it can't be broken up later on down the road, or there's no telling what direction Everett's going to turn 100 years from now. And so by us making these landmarks or whatnot, it won't be changed or tampered with.
So I
is there
think
any
right
landmarks
now,
in that area?
I think right now we're looking at core areas. So I think what we're talking about is that those two areas are pretty similar to each other, and they have similar needs, and the challenges that those residents face oftentimes are pretty similar. So we're saying to combine those two just for right now, and then looking at whether we're going to include View Ridge in that. The question on the table right now is, does anyone have any major opposition to not having View Ridge in there? So if no one has any major opposition, we can do another field vote and then move forward onto our last two areas. So if you're in favor of combining or considering Boulevard Bluffs and Harborview, Seahurst, Glenhaven as a core area, please raise your hand. Is anyone opposed?
I was just going to ask a question. We haven't said anything about Evergreen. Is that part of this area?
No, we're going to go back to that. That was the central Everett area. So right now we're looking at Boulevard Bluffs and Harborview, Seahurst, and Glenhaven. So just these two west ones. So the question on the table is, should we have those two be a core? Or does anyone have any major opposition to just having those two as a core and not including View Ridge Madison at this time as part of this core?
The only thing I would say is that if you just include Boulevard Bluffs and Harborview, Glenhaven, that population is about 7,200. I know we're not using population, but that sure doesn't help. Doesn't get the.
Our cores don't have to have 20,000 yet, so okay. I think the question on the table is just if we'll redo the vote since everyone didn't
So
quite vote.
Leave Evergreen and View Ridge out.
The question on the table is, should Boulevard Bluffs and Harborview, Seahurst, Glenhaven be one of our cores, and not including View Ridge Madison at this time? So that's what we're voting on. So if you're in favor of those two being one of our core areas, please raise your hand. And those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay.
No, I'm in favor of them being a core area.
Oh, okay.
It's just that the area, it's not enough of the core.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
So
in favor.
we'll move forward with Boulevard Bluffs and Harborview, Seahurst, Glenhaven as one of our cores. So now we can talk about that central and moving north area.
So now we move up north, or we establish the central area. How do you all feel about a central district now? Is there any difference between, I guess, 10 minutes ago and now? Recognizing that if we choose this, that would make 4, and we would have one more area.
I would suggest at this point, maybe there be 2 options, one with the north as a basically a district, and then the central area, kind of whatever's left over from the other south 3. And then there seems to be a lot of interest in kind of an up and down north or northwest versus delta version. Could we maybe have an either or that we could be presented
Yes.
with?
Yes. There's nothing wrong with us having 6 areas, let's say, and we would have 5 on one side that we would select and draw that, and of course 5 on another batch that we would draw. So there's nothing wrong with having 6, and we can make a determination having 2 different sort of sets of plans, if you will, because if we're looking at Northwest and Delta being separated versus Northwest and Delta being combined, we're going to have 2 different sets of plans that way. And there's nothing wrong with taking a look at that, and we probably should.
So I think we could have one version maybe where Northwest and Delta are combined, we could call that like that district like North Broadway or something. Because North Everett, I think, would be a little bit. I mean, I would consider more than just that area to be North Everett. I'd consider North Everett to start a little south of there.
Yes.
What's wrong with
Well,
combining Northwest, Delta, Bayside, and Riverside as one?
That's North Everett.
That's North Everett right there. Why not have all four of them together? What?
I feel like you're creating a district when we're worried about, we want to have options and people actually to be able to look at different things. We can't have such giant cores because you can't work with that on creating different maps. By having them separate, then at least he can present the option of, one, having North Everett as an option, and two, having it so that Broadway is a deciding factor, natural boundary.
I understand what you're saying, but I think also we got to take our personal feelings out of this, and let's be fair across the board with everything and everybody, because I think we're thinking about our own.
I understand what you're trying to say, but this is not about personal feelings. This is about letting him do his job and be able to do those deciding things. If you automatically start with stacking, we're going to have problems, and we're not giving the rest
When
of
you
our
say
neighbors.
stacking, it's like gerrymandering, and I'm totally against that.
Tony, I think we make your job challenging if we try and create two areas rather than just North Everett, because that now is going to, if there are two areas and you start drawing maps, that map is going to go quite a way south, and it's really going to, I don't know if the correct term is elongated, whatever the term is, but it's just not, you're the expert. You're the expert. You'll have to come back and give us your perspective on all of that. But I thought the information you'd sent us essentially was to try not to do something like that.
And I think that is correct, but there's nothing wrong with looking at options. If it's only to validate the point. And so if you never look at it, then you really can't validate the theory that you have, and I probably would agree with you. And so there's nothing wrong with us looking at the two options. Let's keep the north then wholly contained, if you will, Delta and Northwest, and then look at one that has them separate and see how that works out. And then the question is whether we have this central district area that we talked about.
Well, I think
So
that
that's the only,
ends it right there, right? Because if we have two versions of a map, one that is splitting down Broadway or it separates Delta and Northwest, and you bring those back to us at the next meeting, then the commission can move forward with selecting if either Delta or Northwest is the core, and then depending on what they choose will determine what they can do with the central area. Because as Jim has pointed out, the numbers won't necessarily work. So if they choose one or the other, then we'll know what that additional district is. But I don't think that at this point, without seeing those two versions of a map, this room is going to move forward with choosing cores. I'm just saying. And I think seeing the information is a great idea. So is that a good point or a good stopping point until we have more information to move forward, or do you need more?
I think we can stop there, but just let me say, if I treat it as a whole entity, we're still missing one district. We have, excuse me, we have 3 right now. We would use that north end as 4. And so I can fill in the remaining areas. You just tell me I'll fill it in, but we're going to have another district there if we use in the plan that looks at one entity in the north.
But it's 2 plans, one that keeps north full and one that separates Delta and Northwest.
And so what he's
Right.
saying is that if we combine Northwest Everett and Delta into one district, then we would need a central district.
Yeah.
And so I think what he's asking for is some sort of
Okay.
what we would want that central district to look like for
In
that map.
Plan 1.
In Plan 1, where those two are combined.
Right. And I could come up with myself,
think so.
or
Nothing
you
about
could
that
give me
being
guidance on
Or these two being
the way
not
you want to
everything.
feel.
You don't get the, I see what you, I'm talking population.
Oh, So I think for the sake of just Tony having what he needs to make more maps for us, does anyone have any major opposition to, in this scenario where Northwest, Everett, and Delta are core, having Glacier View be a central core just for the purpose of making that map? We can decide at our next meeting if we want to move forward that way, but at least for the purpose of that map, does anyone have any major issues with that?
I don't have a major issue with that. I feel like Port Gardner was tagged a few times. That could potentially be another, if we want to have a name for it, that might be a little more recognizable, but it may well get broken up, so that might not be the best. Just another thing to think about.
You already said it will.
Definitely will.
Yeah. That's why I'm concerned about doing like any sort of.
Use your mics.
That's why I'm concerned about doing any sort of like major core areas that he's not able to fiddle with and doing the lines and trying to fix them, because yeah, he already said that Port Gardner was going to be cut up in some sort of manner or way, no matter how we draw the maps.
That's right.
Okay, so
No.
if no one has any major opposition, unless Tony has something drastically different to say than what we're gonna vote on, I'd like to do another field vote just to make sure we're all on the same page. So, for the purpose of moving forward, option one, we would combine Northwest Everett and Delta, and in that situation, or that would be one of our cores. And in that situation, we would have Glacier View be one of our cores. And then option two would be that we have Northwest Everett and Delta separate. And in that case, we would not have Glacier View as a core. So if you are in favor of moving forward in that way, can you raise your hand?
I think you'd still have to.
Oh.
I think you still would have to. Go ahead, Kara.
So are you actually proposing those two options? He's gonna come back next week with both?
Yep.
But that would give
Next
us,
month.
that would
Yes.
give us 6.
No, it'd give us 5.
It'd give us,
It would give us 5. It's just that I was clarifying if we're voting for the return of both of those
Yes.
options for next week.
yeah.
Yes.
Next month. Next month.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so after you vote, I have a staffing question for you guys if you decide.
Okay, so do I need to repeat it or does everyone know what we're voting on? Okay, so an option, we're gonna vote on moving forward with option one and option two, as I just explained. So if you're in favor of moving forward with an option one and option two, raise your hand. Okay,
And that's everyone, so I don't think we need to do a round vote. I just want to ask, given the fact that you have not settled on your cores, and this is kind of a sensitive next meeting, when we go to the Council of Neighborhoods, should we show them what we're looking at but not collect feedback, or would you still like their feedback? Because this conversation changes where we were at last month, and so I just would like I would like some direction from this group on what I should be collecting from the Council of Neighborhoods, since this didn't go as planned. This is better but just curious.
I would like
Let me
feedback.
just throw in a little, interject something, a suggestion possibly, is to use Lowell in that option one, since we already established it as one of the cores. And if we do, then Ms. Weber, you going to the neighborhood council, we've actually done exactly what we said we were going to do. We didn't add any new neighborhoods or any new cores, if you will. And we're creating a map based upon the cores that we actually created. We're just using some and not using others. So you could actually present to them that here are the cores, where, the district masters looking at some options on this, and still check their pulse to see how they feel. If we use Lowell.
And it will be before our next, so I would be going to the neighborhood council before I sat down with this group to discuss the map.
Right.
And so I just, since this is a 2 option, which I didn't anticipate, I just wonder what this group feels I should do. So thank you for the recommendation. I think you guys can discuss real quick and then let me know. because it's getting late.
I'm fine with calling it Lowell.
Nicole, for the next meeting in April, will Tony have, I saw his note about April, June, 5 core areas will be expanded into districts and maps. Can we expect that at the next meeting?
So at the next meeting, what we'll have is the breakup of the 2 separate maps. One that shows our core area as north and one that shows our core area as either Delta and Northwest split. Once we make that decision, then Tony will draw our first drafts of maps.
Would it be helpful, Tony, if you, when you present the information in April with the 2 different options, if you had maps to show what they would look like? That might help people make a decision if they could actually visualize what the impact would be.
Right. I think that I can draw complete plans with the 2 options.
Okay.
So there'll be a plan with option 1 and a plan with option 2. Option 1 will have the Lowell district, if you will. Option 2 will not.
So will there be multiple versions of the 2 different core maps then? Because there could be different possibilities for those cores to create different districts, right? So what will we be looking at next month? I'm confused.
Right. There'll be 2 sets of maps. One map will have the Silver Lake, Casino Road, Boulevard Bluff, Northwest Delta as a whole, and then the Lowell area. So that's 5 districts. The other one will have Silver Lake, Casino Road, Boulevard Bluff, and then we'll separate Northwest and Delta, 5 districts. You see, so there'll be 5 districts for each. Both of them will have Silver Lake, Casino Road, and Boulevard Bluff. One version will have Northwest Delta combined together with Lowell. The other will not have Lowell as a district core, but will have Northwest and Delta separated, making 5. So each plan will be 5 districts.
And will each plan have different options attached? So each plan will have 5 core areas. Will each plan also come with, if there are different options for the same cores, could there be multiple plans per? Does that make sense? Because there's more than one way to work these numbers out based on the cores, hypothetically. So will we see all options for each version, or are we just going to look at one version of each to select what we want you to move forward with?
I would propose one version of each to get an idea of what we're talking about.
Okay.
Because really what we're doing right now is we want to see this Northwest Delta separated, because it's our feelings or potential is that it's going to, both of them have to come down south in an elongated fashion, potentially. We need to see that in the context of a complete plan. And so we're going to see that. And then it would be good to see if we don't do that, if we have just Northwest and Delta combined, but then by doing so, we're actually going to have that extra district, which is the Lowell district, sort of the central district, if you will. But Silver Lake and Casino Road and Boulevard Bluff areas pretty much may maintain the same configuration on both of those plans.
Okay, that just helps me
we're really
prepare for what
looking
we're
and
looking
focusing
at.
in on Northwest. Yes?
That just helps me prepare for what to be ready for next month. So to answer your question, Jim, April will finish our core conversation, and May will be our real first round of looking at maps and having conversations there.
I guess there's I don't know if we get anything if we just created a Northwest Delta district. What we do get is if we created a plan with Northwest Delta in it.
Yeah.
We do get something if we created the 2 separate districts for Northwest Delta. So if we just want to create the Northwest district that goes down south and the Delta district that goes down south, that's fine. I can do that. But creating the Northwest Delta district, I'm not sure if we gain anything by just creating that. So I can do either one. You all decide and tell me. We're still on good time, I think, of creating plans, so we can do either one.
Are we allowed to look at voter turnout numbers and statistics for the different areas? And if so, are you able to provide those?
I don't have access to that. If the city could provide access, I can load that in. If the city provides voter data on each of the precincts, I can come up with that.
Okay.
And then Tony, would you also include some of the areas that you haven't previously, like the industrial and some of those other cities, just so we can see the full shape of each district?
Now, are you saying, could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure that every geographic area of the city will be included in a district, I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Tony, why aren't you going to show just a North Everett plan rather than, you call it combined, but it's North, one is North Everett, one is Northwest Everett and Delta. That's two. North Everett is one, Delta separate, Northwest Everett separate. That's two. Are you going to show those two?
Yes.
Right. I was going to show those two. I was going to show it in the context of a full plan, but I don't have to.
No, that's where I think the discount. I think we want the full plan for two versions. So yes,
Okay.
full plan for two versions, at least a preliminary plan for the next meeting. That is correct, right? That is what everyone is
Yes.
wanting. Okay.
Nicole, to your going to the meeting, I would say that the next districting meeting, this here, will be very interesting for Council of Neighborhoods folks to show up if they're interested, because that discussion would be taking place here. Whether it doesn't need to take place at the Council of Neighborhoods, we're giving them an update, right? But if they want to come and hear the discussion, I would encourage them to come to the next their districting meeting on would be like the 4th of April, whenever that is.
So I'm hearing provide update, invite them here.
Invite them here.
But with the understanding there's no input from them, they're just listening, right? Right. Okay, just want to make that clear.
Wasn't the point of you guys going to the meeting for outreach and to give them an update of where they can learn about what's going on when they're able to provide
And
input?
collect some input on the map at that time.
Okay, you guys were
But
going
that
to-
was previously, before that was when we had 9 potentials, just to see what they thought about those 9, so that I could bring that information back and you guys could say, oh, this is great input, this is not. But now that we're down to 6 and
So
we're
when
looking
is-
at 2 versions, I'm hearing just provide an update and invite them to the conversation to listen.
Okay, so they may ask, when is their opportunity to actually provide input?
And I have a full timeline that I have, and when we're going to do neighborhood or citywide forums and conversations, and I'll bring that and provide it.
Okay.
It's not going to be specific per day, but it'll show you approximately the months that we're doing that type of thing.
I would just add to that, right? Anybody can write to us at any time.
At any time.
So,
I think, anyone have anything else?
I think we're all done. I move to adjourn. Does anyone want a second? Okay. All in favor, raise your hand. If anyone's opposed, they can just stay.
Thank you, Tony.
All right. Take care, y'all.
Well, I was struggling several.
Oh, yeah, you did say that too.